So how are revolutionary ideas born? Is it a sudden flash of genius, or is it, something a lot messier? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the creative chaos behind one of the most influential economic books ever written, John Maynard Keynes's The General Theory, and see how this world-changing idea was actually put together.
Okay, let's just start right here. This single sentence from a letter Keynes wrote to a colleague is, well, it's pretty incredible. This isn't just some polite disagreement. It's basically a confession. He's telling one of his closest collaborators, hey, that theory you're criticizing, I don't even believe in it anymore. This one line really captures the whole story of how the general theory was born. It wasn't a single aha moment. It was a constant and probably painful process of killing off his own old ideas. So who was this dead self Keynes was talking about? Well, it was the guy who wrote his last big book, A Treatise on Money. By the early 1930s, right in the middle of the Great Depression, Keynes knew that book just wasn't cutting it anymore. His old way of thinking just couldn't explain the crushing, persistent unemployment he was seeing everywhere.
Now, the crucial thing here is, he didn't have a new theory just ready to go. He knew the old one was broken, but he had no blueprint for what would replace it. What he did next was embark on this journey of intellectual combat, of trial and error, of just relentless revision. It's like he was building a new ship while he was sailing it through the biggest storm in a century.
And here's the thing, he wasn't sailing alone, not even close. The general theory was forged in the fire of some really intense debate. Keynes surrounded himself with some of the absolute sharpest minds at Cambridge, and they weren't there to tell him he was a genius. They were there to challenge every single thing he said.
Take this letter, for instance. It's from Joan Robinson, who was a brilliant economist herself. And she's not just asking a polite question here, she is directly challenging his entire method. This wasn't some kind of master and student relationship. This was a battle of equals, and they were all fighting to get the theory right.
And just listen to the tone here. Could we have another word? But meanwhile, I take up your challenge. It just perfectly shows what this process was like. It was a live, ongoing conversation. A series of intellectual duels fought out in letters and weekend meetings, all to make the final argument sharper and closer to the truth.
Robinson was part of this informal group that some people called the Cambridge Circus, and it included these intellectual heavyweights like D.H. Robinson, R.F. Kahn, and Piero Straffa. These were not yes men. They were the absolute essential stress test for every single piece of Keynes's evolving theory. So you've got these brilliant minds arguing, right? But the arguments weren't just about equations or logic. They were about something way more fundamental, language. See, building a new theory means you have to find a new way to describe the world, and that became one of the biggest struggles of all.
Keynes basically realized that the old vocabulary of economics just wasn't up to the task. It couldn't explain the chaos of the world he was living in. A lot of the time, these big arguments with his colleagues would boil down to the definition of a single word, because he knew he needed the right words, the right building blocks, to create his new framework. He needed a language that could capture the messiness of human psychology, not just some sterile math.
And right here, you can literally see the thinking happening on the page. This is a page from a draft manuscript, and you see Keynes crossing out the term marginal productivity of capital and replacing it with marginal efficiency of capital. Now, this isn't just a minor edit. This is a massive conceptual leap happening with the stroke of a pen.
So what's the big deal? Well, marginal productivity was an old term that looked backwards. It was about physical output that had already happened. But his new term, marginal efficiency, that was all about looking forwards. It was about expectations, about animal spirits, about the psychological confidence of investors. This one change was absolutely central to everything. It moved economics from a world of certainty into the world we actually live in, one that's governed by our messy, human, and often irrational hopes and fears about a future we can't possibly know.
And this quote just nails why he cared so much about the words. He wasn't trying to write a legal document. He was trying to change how people instinctively felt about how the economy works. He wanted to build a theory that made sense on a gut level, that felt true to the uncertain world all around him.
Okay, so the language is getting sharper. The ideas are taking shape, but intuition isn't enough, right? This new theory had to actually work in the real world. And that's where the Cambridge Circus came in again, helping to ground all these new abstract ideas in cold, hard data.
This is where younger economists like Colin Clark were just absolutely vital. While Keynes was up in the clouds, wrestling with the grand theory, Clark was on the ground, doing the really painstaking work of taking these brand new concepts and seeing if they actually match the economic statistics of the day. This was brand new stuff, testing a big theory against real-time data while it was still being built.
And this is the raw material they were working with. Clark put together these tables with quarterly data on national output, wages, investment, all for the UK. He was trying to measure the very things that Keynes was defining, turning these abstract ideas into actual numbers.
And then, this graph is the payoff. Clark took Keynes's new formulas and used them to calculate what the national output should have been. Then he plotted that against what it actually was. The solid line is reality. The dotted line is the theory. And would you look at that? The fit was incredible. For Keynes, this must have been a huge validating moment. It was proof that his ideas weren't just elegant. They actually had real power to explain the world.
All right, so the language is getting sharper, the data is providing support, so how did this all come together into a book? Well, the actual blueprint for the general theory was anything but stable. It was constantly changing.
What you're looking at here are two early drafts of the table of contents. Just look at the difference. The structure is changing dramatically. What was once book 2 is now book 1. Entire chapters are being rethought, shuffled around. The final book wasn't just written from A to Z, its entire skeleton was broken and reset over and over again as the main argument got clearer.
So the big takeaway here is that the version of the general theory that was finally published in 1936, well, it wasn't some pristine idea that just popped into Keynes's head. It was the battle-hardened result of this super intense, collaborative, and, let's be honest, probably exhausting process. So when you boil it all down, what have we really seen? We've basically replaced the simple myth of the lone genius with a reality that's a whole lot messier, a lot more human, and frankly, a lot more interesting. The big breakthrough wasn't some sudden insight, it was a slow, gradual evolution. It wasn't a clean, straight line, it was messy and full of dead ends. And it wasn't some abstract theory from an ivory tower. It was forged in the heat of debate and tested against the real world.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. What Keynes' process shows us is that a real revolution in thinking. It doesn't just require a brilliant mind. It requires a willingness to kill your darlings, to surround yourself with people who will tell you you're wrong, and to constantly test your ideas against reality. Which makes you wonder, are the great ideas shaping our world today born any differently?